Hello, everybody. This works, does it? Works, cool. So today we're going to be talking about MSIX, not MSIX app attach. We'll cover a little bit about that, but we're going to be talking about this application containerization technology by Microsoft. Interestingly, we've got some few interesting faces in the room, and some people who are going to heckle. Please do not heckle during my session. Do it afterwards. Also, vendors who layering application packaging technology, delivery technology, show of hands, how many are in the room? Cool. Right, so no pressure then. Right, so let's get started. So we're going to talk about the latest updates. We're going to be talking about the ins and outs of the containers, how it all works. It's going to be a bit of a technical deep dive, so I apologize in advance for those who are not technical, and I'll try and kind of keep it a little bit rudimentary at times so that it doesn't kind of cause any headaches before lunch. I'm also aware that lunchtime is the most important meal of the day, so I'll try and get it done just in time for lunch, okay? So I'll do it in 45, and if I can do it slightly earlier, I will do. Okay, so agenda today, obviously we're going to talk a bit about application landscape. We're going to talk a bit about MSIX, as I said, the benefits on installation, security considerations, some myth busting, some confusion from other vendors who have missed the whole concept of it. I'm going to correct that today, and I'm also going to kind of like summarize on MSIX app attach as well. So a little bit about me. So my name is Ryan Mangan. I'm a freelance consultant specializing in various different things in cloud. I've produced a few books in my time, specifically the Master in Azure Virtual Desktop was the big one, which Microsoft purchased the rights for due to its success. There's the book there. And obviously, before we start the session, going into some of the details, President Obama at the time Barack Obama came out with a really good statement about change. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. So what I'm trying to say here is that we could all sit with the same technology, do the same process day in, day out. If we don't change, nothing will ever improve. There's no continual improvement, and we'll never get better. You know, I'm very much focused on self-improvement and continuing to move forward. And I think with technology, we need to embrace that change, which is coming more and more quicker and quicker. Release dates of Windows operating systems, applications, okay, they don't change as much, some of the older ones, but obviously the technology, what delivers them, is changing at a rapid rate. How we work can change based on environmental factors, impacts how we adapt. Okay, so a bit of nostalgia for Guy Leach only, who's probably been here before time. Starting from Windows version 1. So as we go through the time and through the years, there's been changes to the operating system, but some of them applications which we used back in 1985 may be required today. And in some of the organizations I've had the pleasure of working with, we have seen them applications in action. Interestingly, though, everybody remember Windows Vista? It's almost like Voldemort in the name in the Harry Potter book. They decided to change how documents and settings worked to users and program data and all that kind of jazz. So that transition kind of caused a few challenges for applications at that point. Microsoft being Microsoft, sorry Microsoft people, decided that time that, do you know what, we'll do what we want, it's our operating system, we don't care about all the development that's gone on for years. And they made that. And the biggest challenge we have today, as you know, with like cars and other things, is this growing application economy. We're now approximately around about 7 trillion versions and variations in the world today, which is a significant amount, and that's been sourced by Microsoft and others on the actual telemetry. It could be much more, because what we don't see is like manufacturing off net gapped technologies. So this could be 8-9 trillion. We don't actually know, but that gives a line in the sand that in 2018, Microsoft predicted over 6 trillion. If you round it all up, it's actually 7. Okay, so app formats. So everybody know about MSI, familiar installer, XE, MSI, and all the others. So MSI is not MSIX, and they're completely separate technologies, just to kind of get that one in the open right now. MSIX is separate, completely different, does not have the same behaviors. It's completely different. So if anybody tries to compare MSI and MSIX, I'll be there with my school ruler telling you off. They are completely different, have a different purpose. App V is the younger brother of MSIX. In this case, I'll explain why in a minute. AppV is deprecated in 2026, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute. And that was basically file redirection technology in its, they call it virtualization, but you could redirect files and program data to different areas. And then obviously along came MSIX, which, anybody use an Xbox? Anybody play video games? You know, when you haven't got children screaming and shouting or taking over the controller. Have you had that problem? Well, majority of games delivered to... You don't like Xbox, do you? We know this one. You're a PlayStation guy. Yeah, so basically, all the apps today are streamed for Xbox by MSIX. That's a fundamental fact. So all the development is released in there. And also when pre-release of games, they start seeding that or streaming that application via MSIX to the Xbox itself. So it's prolific already in industry for the consumer market, and obviously we just now need to get it heavily invested into production. And then we've got third party. So some people may not want to use MSIX. MSIX is native, and there's nothing wrong with using other technologies. Layering technology, other container technology, it doesn't matter. It's what's fit for your purpose. The reason why I'm drawn to MSIX is there's no vendor lock-in, and not everybody can afford and has a price book to go out and spend money on other technology. That's a fundamental fact. So think about, if it's free, can we use it? Or if not, we go out and buy additional technology to support that. So there's no right or wrong answer. It's a case of understanding your budget constraints and also understanding what you want to try to achieve. So, AppV is forecast for end of life 2026, but I'm sure a few people will be scratching their heads going, should we extend it longer? Maybe, maybe not. And obviously the replacement for AppV is MSIX and MSIX App Attach. The majority of applications I've worked with in AppV do work in MSIX. A few little tweaks and things here and there, but it does work. So you can achieve a transition from AppV to MSIX today. Obviously, MSIX and MSIX App Attach are completely separate technologies, and I'll explain the differences in a minute, because obviously that's kind of very important to the whole kind of concept of MSIX. So, obviously on the table there's a few things there about signing certificates and stuff, and obviously sharing across apps, and MSIX now supports pretty much everything what AppV did. However, does today, soon not tomorrow. But obviously, some people are not aware of that, so we can talk about that as well. So just an introduction into MSIX. And MSIX is basically like a zip file, which has a XML file inside that with a lot of app data and files and things in there, indexes and stuff. And that XML is the brain of the operation. That controls how the application works, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a second. Effectively, it acts on the operating system. It was Project Helium originally, was the name of it, and it acts as a container, so it's like a Docker container. From kind of how I explain it is it sits on the operating system as a process inside a container. Natively, without modification, it cannot write to the operating system. It can read it, but it can't write. It can only write to its virtual paths, and that's very important. You can turn that off, by the way, and do other things which people didn't know, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It only supports x86 and 64, and you need to have a code sign certificate to make sure it runs. Some organizations, you know, like the MSIs don't sign the packages, some do, because they like to follow rigid security processes. With MSIX, in production, it needs a certificate. So looking at the architecture. So in this lovely little diagram I spent a lot of time drawing, I didn't really, thank God for PowerPoint. You can see that the package payloads, that's all the applications at the top. Then at the bottom left, you can see the application manifest, and that's basically where all the configuration is. Shortcuts, I'll throw that one in now. Firewall rules, I'll throw that one in as well now, can be configured in that app manifest. And then obviously there's a signature file, which is verified it's been signed. And then obviously block map, which basically is like an index of how that all kind of comes together. Because it's a container, and because it doesn't write out to the main operating system natively, without configuration, if you want to do fancy things, you need to use something called the Package Support Framework. The Package Support Framework is effectively, there's other names for it, like a stub, a launcher, and a lot of companies have been doing this for years. Microsoft, if you go to the app assurance team, they will basically create you a custom exe, what sits in front of your application. We should launch that, and then it kind of does all of this magical stuff behind the scenes. What Microsoft did is they said, hey, users, why are you spending all this money going to developers? Go and do this. So the package support framework allows you to do advanced modifications and customizations of your application. And by using PSF, as we'll call it, that actually allows a higher success rate of moving older applications or complex applications to the MSIX platform. It is a little bit of a learning curve to understand some of the kind of stuff, but if you are, and he's not my granddad or my dad, he's another expert in the field, Tim Mangan, he's written a fantastic tool which is free, which basically helps you modify and write them required changes for PSF. It's called the PSF tool. If you want something more advanced, Tim also has tools which you can buy, which are quite affordable to do that. And there's other technologies out there, like AppCure, Remote Free, and others which you can use too, to kind of help you along that journey. Right. Research and kind of market research is always important, testing. So I basically took an application with PSF or a stub or a modification file in front of there. And the challenge you've got by using PSF is that it has a performance increase, as in delay in launching the application because it's doing all these things in the background. And because PSF at this moment in time hasn't got these notifications for the user, or you can't configure them, which I've requested, you don't know what's going on. So one of the challenges you may have if you don't write something fancy in PowerShell is when you're clicking on the application as a user and it's not launching, going, what's going on, what's going on? Keep clicking it. You'll have 5,000 different versions of the application launching up if you're not careful. And that's a big gotcha I've found with PSF. So I've always been drawn to some of these applications using App Assurance Team or writing my own stubs because I get to put a little prompt in there saying, thanks for clicking the application, please bear with us before we break your computer or blue screen it. So just bear that in mind. Obviously, natively, the aim of the game is to try and have MSIX as a native package without the modifications where possible. Not always. Okay, so I mentioned Project Helium. So it's a lightweight container that runs as a process on the operating system. The MSIX processes run as like child processes within inside that container. So if you're using analysis tools like Procmon, you'll see that these things are running underneath the main container. Let me just get rid of that. As I mentioned as well, it reads the global registry and file system by default. It doesn't write to it, and that's the benefit. So if I basically got an application with malware in it, and I try to, and I run that as an MSIX, there's a lower impact because it can't do anything to the core operating system. That's a fundamental fact because it's read-only. If you turn the container off, then obviously it's a different story, but there's a massive benefit by using container technology. If you don't use MSIX, the same policy applies. You know, you're reducing the risk of kind of malware and other things running. Everybody aware of the FreeCX attack beginning of the year? It was around about March time. I have other interests, and my company was notified by that. And effectively, people were told to put exclusions in their antivirus to allow the application to be installed, and it was riddled with viruses. And effectively, if it was in an MSIX container, that wouldn't have been an issue because it was a three-pronged attack. It installs on the machine, then it goes out via API and starts downloading the resources to then initiate the actual kind of attack, whereas the container would prevent that. And then the other thing as well is, unless you create a shared package container, which I'll talk about briefly in a bit, you can't communicate between different packages as well. You can only communicate inside that app. We'll talk about different kind of structures of MSIX briefly as well in a minute. Okay, so package behavior. This is things people don't talk about. And everything I'm talking about today is online, publicly available. You just got to find it. So, for example, if you want to write under the program file section Windows Apps, it's not allowed. You can't really get to it unless you basically rewrite all the permissions. It's not going to happen. If you write to the user's app folder, including create, delete, and update, copied to a private per user app location. So it basically creates a separate location for that MSIX package. And all the rights are kept during the package upgrade, only remove when you delete it. The thing about MSIX as well is a little section in the apps in the fancy Windows 11 UI and Windows 10 now. You can basically do a cleanup of the application. What that does effectively is just purge all user data from that app. So it's basically like without uninstalling it, you're starting again. And then obviously registry as well, similar sort of thing. You can basically have a private user area for that as well. Different ways of packaging MSIX. So you can install one application in the container and be happy as Larry and carry on. You can also install multiple apps in one MSIX package. So if you have dependencies like Thomson's Reuters Matasphere going back a few years, there's 13 applications required to make the CRM client work. you would potentially put them into one package. Obviously, that package might be a little bit beefy, and this is predominantly targeted at Windows 10 users, because Windows 11 you can use shared package containers. You can't on Windows 10 at the moment. Anyway, so you can basically create these advanced packages with all the different components in there. And I also like a single kind of package because it keeps my life sweet. And also, as you can see there, package one, nice and simple. And then you've got shared package containers. So going back to obviously AppV days, you can create what we call a shared package container on Windows 11, which is effectively another XML file. I mean, come on, XML files everywhere here. Why not JSON? And this XML file is installed via PowerShell on the operating system or using third-party tooling. I believe AppCure does that as well. And you can basically essentially link all your packages which are going to communicate together. So if they have like a dependency of each other, the XML tells the operating system that these can talk to each other. So you're effectively granting permission for these all to talk to each other. Okay, so that's the shared package container. Right, I'm going to do a bit of myth busting now, so bear with me. Strap yourself in. So people have been comparing packages with MSIX, and there's been some slight inaccuracies there. So obviously, if you wanted to do a custom active setup, you can do that with PSF or a stub launcher. It's not an MSI, so you can't basically do advertised features. All files associated and supported, yes. Natively with the Microsoft packaging tool, the challenge we have with it is it's still been heavily developed. So a lot of the features you can do in MSIX aren't easily done, they're advanced, so you can't have a nice simple GUI to click a lot of buttons. They're getting there, but give them time, they've got a lot of different things on the go. But soon and later on, you will have the ability to do fancy things. So you can do file associations, I've done it myself. And when I've been honest, I've achieved very high success rates using the packaging tool. Obviously, I know what I'm on about, but within time, you can achieve quite good success rates. Browser add-ins is possible. You may need to use PSF in some sense. Click-to-run apps, they've actually updated the latest version of the MSIX packaging tool today to support that. And if you do struggle, you can use other products out there in the market to kind of help speed up that process. But click-to-run apps today, you select the click-to-run app, and the Microsoft packaging tool will then enter into a wizard to kind of go and create your package. COM applications are supported. DCOM is possible, but more complicated. More or less, that's where you're going to have your problems and challenges. Firewall rules, yes. Firewalls can be added to an MSIX package, and it's in the manifest. And that basically you can then start setting out different controls, different TCP ports, you name it. It's very similar to it's a Windows firewall basically. Everything you see in the Windows firewall, you can take that and build out a policy and then put it in the manifest. Fonts, you can create an MSIX package, just creating fonts. So if you just wanted to have a library of fonts for your customers or your users, you would effectively build out the fonts in this package and just deliver that out to every desktop via Intune or whatever you want to do, and off you go. And the best thing about that is one way of distributing malware is via fonts. So if you want to sanitize and have control over that, you could have signed, verified way of doing that using MSIX. Kernel drivers, no, it's a driver. Everybody tries to say that a driver is a part of an application. You're getting confused. An MSI allows you to link and install printers and drivers, but it's not an actual application. It's a kind of component which helps with that. So drivers can be installed by a PowerShell or other things, but MSIX is not designed for drivers. It's designed for the application and its application components only. Non-exe shortcuts, partial support for that. There is work ongoing with it, but it can be done, and it can be done with PSF. You then got things like packages without shortcuts, is yes. Printer drivers, said drivers already. I don't want to repeat myself, but drivers are drivers. And then run once and all that kind of stuff. Run once is done by PSF, again, because you've got to write out to the operating system. So the run once is designed to kind of do that first step, and then after that, it's all inside the container. There is a bit of a security risk with using PSF, which I'll cover shortly, because what you can do is potentially use it in a malware situation as well, so it just needs a bit of awareness on there. Services are supported, but they run outside the container. That's just the way it is, so you can use services with MSIX. If you're using the MSIX app attach, what you need to do is break the service from the package and because obviously you can't run a service through an attached disk, and basically split the application and service and install them separately. Most applications, 95% of them, will allow you to pull the service out and install that separately. Shell extensions, shortcuts in there. So if you haven't got a picture of that, I'll give you a couple of seconds to take a picture of that if you want it, and I'll change the slide. But that's pretty much the de facto statement there from Microsoft. Cool. Uninstall. So the whole concept about MSIX is it's meant to be secure, clean, and flexible and easy to kind of use. Everybody remember the term WinRot? WinRot is, everybody, forever wiping PCs still today. So WinRot, this is supposedly the answer to WinRot in some cases, because when you uninstall a native MSIX package, it basically removes everything for that app. Complete clear down. It's gone. There's no residual value left in there. It's gone, completely disappeared. And the problem we've had with all these other installers in the past is it leaves remnants and it builds up over time. And Billy Bob gives you this laptop from 10 years ago, and it's just the registry looks like Pandora's box. So, a massive benefit really is from autopilot and all these kind of modern cleanups. If people want to remove it on a new application, it kind of simplifies the cleanup process and makes the laptop last a little bit longer in the midst of a user. So, security benefits. The container, not native, it requires a code signing certificate, and you can add restrictions and package extensions and firewall rules. Package extensions are really good. There's so many different ones you can do, and you can enforce integrity as well, which basically it can initiate the antivirus to start scanning the package before it actually installs it. So there's quite a lot you can do with the security realm. And then also you can block elevation and do specific kind of restrictions on the application. For example, you don't want that application to ever have access to the webcam, you can apply that as well. So you can tier off very specific kind of controls to them applications, which is good, right? Sadly, for those who don't want a code signing certificate, guess what? You need one. Whatever you do, you will need to sign the package at the end, and that certificate, if it's not public, will need to be, even public will need to be distributed. My recommendation is, if you're running an enterprise organization with a certificate authority, is I recommend that you create the certificate in there, which can be basically pulled at any time, and use that to distribute your packages, so that you've got central control for all of your apps. Public certificates are great for them smaller, minor use cases, but public certificates create a risk. And there was an incident last year, I believe, with NVIDIA, where their code sign certificate got taken, and that effectively got used in malware, and it was basically straight through. So you can see the risk with using public certificates. There's a fundamental flaw in, I think they changed it, but there is some kind of challenges. Okay, so I'm going to drill into this a little bit more. So security considerations. Effectively, services run outside the container, so you can't really control what that does when it's running. So that is one of the limitations of that. But again, how many people run a service in any other way? If you need to kind of secure services in a particular way, you'll need to go out and buy something off the shelf. Package support framework writes outside the container. This is important. So anything you do in the PowerShell scripts or in the PSF, it will manipulate and do stuff free will. It'll run as the elevated admin. So if I basically want to make changes to registry, apply systems, download stuff via API, it can actually be done by PSF. So before using MSIX or getting these outside of the network or things from Winget or whatever, you should be opening up your package and having a look at it. There should be anything that comes in from the outside world. I've had this debate so many times with people. Winget is safe. No, it's not. It is really not. Go roll the dice. Oh, snake eyes. So you really need to kind of look at what you're actually bringing into the organization, because you never know if 3CX might have another hit, right? So bear that in mind. The other thing as well is, if you turn off the container, which you can do, and I'm going to talk about it shortly, you can actually run the application. It allows the application to write outside. So if I turn off the container, virtualization for either file, registry, or both, you can run the MSIX package as a normal application. So it's like an MSI, it installs and runs, and it can just do what it wants. You can still apply certain kind of context, like firewall rules and things, and shortcuts and modifications, but be aware, when you try and uninstall that application, it will have remnants, number one. Number two, that has full control of your operating system. So applications like Bloomberg and others can actually run even though they don't want to work at all. And obviously when people say apps like Bloomberg, everybody kind of falls over because it's kind of carnage. And then obviously the other problem is tech vendors potentially impacting the security certificates. So again, when you package applications or you make changes, you should really be using, like I've already said it, an internal certificate or a self-assigned which you've kind of allocated to that and distributed. But that's quite important. So if you start making modifications or manipulating the package to do different things, you need to understand the risks associated with that.
Just a quick question on that.
Yes.
Right. Now, most people implementing CAs do a terrible job of it, or don't maintain them very well, or it's been bodged together for some reason or other. Very few times we walk into an organisation and see a well put together CA. Any recommendations around that?
Well, I can't speak for the rest of the industry, but I suppose follow the guidance. I mean, I can build you a CA quite easily, but there's different routes for CAs. So some people are using what do they call them now? DigiCert can now offer them side of services. You can actually go for privatized vendors who actually take care of all of that. I know some blue chip companies are using that service today. But if you kind of follow the basic guidelines of a domain certificate and have someone who's basically regularly maintaining, revocations are being cleaned up. I know what you're referring to because we see it with device and client certificates all the time, right? It's very, very messy. But that's business process. If an organisation can't follow simple processes or put processes in place, that's not on us, that's on the business themselves. So really what I would say is make sure you've got good maintenance and cleanup processes and procedures, which is day one really. Right, so if you haven't seen the MSIX packaging tool, does it work? Well, it works. Like how I put a little Mac in there. I should have put like an iGel logo or something in there, just to prove the point that we're connected to a virtual desktop. Obviously, I'm just going to run through the wizard. As you can see, it's very simple. It might be difficult to see because of the light and stuff, so I apologise about that. But effectively, what it's doing is checking that the package driver is installed. So the MSIX packaging tool has a driver. It pulls from the Microsoft Cloud Stream or wherever it's pulling it from. You can actually do that manually through the optional settings in the application part of Windows. Does all the checks and then you can proceed. A lot of vendors, they are using MSIX packaging tool behind the scenes, so they don't have their own packaging technology. They're using basically command line instructions to kind of orchestrate this, which is fine if you're automating mass amounts, and if they're doing that, that's fine. There's no problem with that, but yeah, like I said, the majority of organizations are using the Microsoft packaging tool. There's very few like Advanced Installer and AppKeyer out there which are using their own native technology because it's complicated, right? I wouldn't know. So select my application, select how I want to sign it, put my password in, my certificate in first of all. See, I schoolboyed it there. I'm just basically burning time, really. Time burning. And you can also code timestamp as well. So timestamp is very important because when the certificate expires, if you aren't using timestamping, the app stops working. What the timestamp does, it allows you to continue. And you can use self-assign with timestamps, and you can use internal domain with timestamps as well. So you're not kind of capped. You can also use the Azure certificate vault as well, key vault, and basically use the create code sign certificates in there and issue them out. And I believe, again, the only two who can do that today, I think AppKeyer is the biggest and Advanced Installer is the second, from a feature kind of requirement set. And there you go, I've packaged the most complicated application, Notepad++, using MSIX. And the only reason why it's the quickest. You can make changes now, because you're still in the packaging process, so I'm making some changes. And it's reading the changes I'm making, it's collecting them, and then when I finalize, you go for your next bit, it grabs all that stuff. So if you want to customize the application, like registry settings for views or whatever, color coding, or fonts, or I don't know, default templates, you can do that, and then you proceed with the end bit, and then it basically packages that as a standard set. So once it's all done, you'll get that customized experience when you launch the application for the first time. And there, it's done. And obviously, it doesn't work without a certificate, so now I'm going to install a certificate. That was actually done on purpose. That wasn't a schoolboy. Launch it again and it should actually work this time. And there you go. So you can now install that. And it'll launch immediately. Bing. So that's basically the full basic process of taking an application and run it through the MSIX packaging tool by Microsoft. Okay, so MSIX app attach. Raise your hand if you know what that is. Not you, Jim. Get that hand down. Right, so MSIX is a container technology, and MSIX app attach is effectively a disk with the MSIX package unzipped and placed in that disk, and then the system permissions are applied to that folder structure to behave like it would be inside an MSIX, if that makes sense. So effectively, it's taking the application from the program files folder, WinApps, and putting it in a disk, and then going to redirect. So very similar to FS Logix, but it's not. Let's be very clear. Whatever people say, oh, it's FX Logix technology. No, it's not. It's different, okay? The concept might sound similar, but it's different. So effectively, what we're going to do is we're going to take an application, unzip it, place it into a disk, and then what we're going to do is apply some permissions to it, and that's your disk ready. There's so many different technologies out there. So the official response is MSIX App Attach is an Azure Virtual Desktop technology, okay? That is the official. Anybody else doing MSIX App Attach technically isn't MSIX App Attach, and people would probably nod with me going, yeah, that's the official. But people call it MSIX App Attach across the board because it's easier. When you attach a disk, it's read-only, okay? So you can't write outside of it. So that's a fundamental fact. So applications which require read and write, you're not going to be able to do in MSIX App Attach. And any other technology which is layering or similar to that is the same, has the same problematic issue. So if you want to kind of manipulate and make them changes, you shouldn't really use MSIX App Attach. So there's use cases for it, but at the same time, there's no utopia golden MSIX App Attach will save the world and it'll do everything I need. No, I'll be honest with you, you might buy thin clients from iGel, but you might need to kind of go and reinvest in a whole new kind of platform for iGel to connect to. You know, it's not just a simple case of this will solve everything, right? That's the point I'm making. So how it works is the concept of how it works is the user profile attaches via FS Logix. Thank you very much. And you've got your common applications. So someone mentioned, Office, Microsoft Office. So Microsoft Office, as we know, through time, and you go through all the folder structures and the files of it, it's a labyrinth of development by various different people. And if you look at how Office is a whole department at Microsoft, they're all responsible for different components like PowerPoint, for Word, not if I'm right, and all this. And the problem you've got is because it's such a complicated, big platform, Office, it's not a case of really simple, we're going to put it in MSIX. So I'm not saying it won't ever get in MSIX, but it's a fundamental fact that today, as you saw, great demo by the way, is it cloud streams. So what happens is with first install, it connects to Microsoft and pulls down the files. Some of them components will be MSIX, so some kind of runtime and various different components will come down as MSIX, but the core of the application set will always be common. So when I refer to common applications, I'm referring to things like Office, okay? And then what we've got is a sales app, 1 and 2, which can be delivered by MSIX App Attach. I did have app file containers previously, but Microsoft have deprecated it. And the question I've got for you, Microsoft, is why? So what you could do previously, well, it's still usable today, but it's deprecated, or soon to be deprecated, is you could take Office and move the files to a disk so it's not on the actual main operating system, if that makes sense. So when you log on, it'll attach that disk for the applications. Obviously, you still have to install it on the main image at first, but it just basically reduces the operating system disk down, and obviously you can use that storage, which has now got more handles, thanks to Microsoft increasing to 10,000 Azure files. So that's the concept of MSIX App Attach. So you can't run services on it, you can't run PSF on it, and you cannot basically have admin rights to that application in most cases because it's read-only, it's a disk. But for all them applications which work great, and the majority of applications, you can put them into the MSIX bucket. Anything else will need to be on common, if that makes sense. And then, obviously, you used to have another layer there, which was like file containers, but they deprecated it, and when I saw that, I was very disappointed. So obviously you've got your OS, you've got your profile, and you've got your apps in there. So just so we're aware here, first of all, we're using MSIX App Attach. You need to create the MSIX package, which we've gone through and spoke about. Obviously for MSIX App Attach, as I've said, it needs to not do anything too complicated and fancy at this time, because obviously you'll have limitations with the disk. Obviously you're going to create a disk. You can use the Microsoft packaging tool and the MSIX MGR tool to create the MSIX image. And then you're going to need to configure Azure files or NetApp files in Azure. Then you upload your image, and then you configure AVD in this case, and off you go. And then obviously make sure your certificate's published and you're done. So, considerations. Azure files did have a limit of 2,000 file handles, and now it's 10,000, thank you, which makes life a little bit easier, because obviously I like to call Azure files the poor man's storage system, because if you go to NetApp files, you best get your credit card out, it's very expensive. Obviously, if you're an enterprise and you need that sheer large number of IOPS, you need to use NetApp files, all jokes aside. Latency, and this is important, everybody, latency needs to be less than 400 milliseconds. So in the future, you might be able to store your disks off net, and if they're off net, you might be able to deliver them as via paging or whatever under less than 400 milliseconds, and that's achievable in modern day bandwidth in most cases. Obviously, if you live in the sticks and you've got 2 meg, I don't think so, but in most cases you should be good in an office. Recommendation is build Active Directory Certificate Authority for MSIX App Attach. I recommend that. Where possible, you could use key vaults and other things as well. Disaster recovery was problematic, but obviously there's things in place now which are much better, but just be aware that you need to make sure that if you are making changes, I believe there's big changes coming to Microsoft. I don't know yet because I've not been told, but the big changes which come in kind of handle some of the problematic file path challenges because of the redesign or something that's going on. And you can use MSIX App Attach outside of Azure Virtual Desktop. So name a few. Parallels RAS has full support and capability for it. Nerdio has full support and capability for MSIX App Attach, even though Nerdio technically is using ABD. But one of the best things I like about Parallels RAS is that it's multi-cloud, so you can basically go on premises, on cloud, and wherever else, AWS, so it's irrelevant really. Looking at the MSIX image structure, which I kind of spoke about already, you can see here that you've got VHD, VHDXR, SIMFS. SIMFS is the composite file system, which I believe will probably move into container technology later on as well. Effectively, it's a bunch of files which mount similar to a disk, but not, and it's much faster than using a VHD and VHDX. However, some applications don't work with SIMFS. I don't know why. I've not found that out yet, but there is that. So you need to make sure when you're doing packaging for MSIX App Attach that you test them thoroughly before you go live. But the structure is very simple. You've got the disk, the package, and if you had multiple apps in the same MSIX package, it would do the same in there as well. And here is a MSIX packaging flow. So it talks about obviously running the process, but important to note that some of the kind of work you want to do with MSIX App Attach, you must use a third-party tool. Microsoft does not natively support some of the kind of methods for like packaging multiple apps into one disk. So if you want to do some fancy stuff with MSIX App Attach and get quite clever, you'll need to kind of explore third-party options. But that's the kind of imaging package flow for that. So, after I've rattled your ears for 38 minutes and 52 seconds. Vast application landscape, it's massive. It'll surpass my time, it'll probably go on. We've not even spoke about mobile apps and apps of other origin, but it's humongous. So there's plenty for everybody to play with, including the vendors. Some people might want MSIX App Attach, MSIX, and some people might want other technologies out there. Try and compare like for like, not apples and pears. A lot of organisations are getting confused with MSI and MSIX. They're completely separate. There's nothing. There's no deprecation for MSI. MSI is still a viable enterprise-ready delivery solution. Yes, it can have malware and things injected into it, but there's ways and means to kind of protect that as well. Similar to MSIX, they all have the flaws. AppV is currently end of life 2026. So if you are using AppV, you need to get to version 5 because once you're in version 5, the roadmap to convert into MSIX is much more fluid and easier to do. And if you're not, you need to kind of get moving quickly. Obviously, we spoke about MSIX, a deep dive, containers, what you can and can't do. Obviously, there's only 45 minutes in this session, so I can't grill you for longer. But there's quite a lot covered there. And then we did a very brief, terrible demo of MSIX packaging tool due to the light. I'm blaming the light. And then obviously we spoke a few bits about benefits and pros and cons and MSIX. And that at 40 minutes and 24 seconds, ready for lunch. Is that any questions? Yes?
How well does MSIX coexist with AppV? So if you're using packaging groups with AppV, MSIX in a package container, can they coexist?
That sounds very complicated. But you're on like saying running one application in MSIX and then running the other in AppV?
They pick different apps, but can they coexist on the same machines?
Yeah, they can coexist. Yeah, the different technology, yeah. So they will run, yeah. I mean, if you're trying to get them to talk to each other, it'll depend on how the container is configured for MSIX. But they will run.